Early in 1943, the Tunisian front hardened into prepared lines. The Eighth Army had spent 3 months pushing west after El Alamein and the long pursuit through Libya. Across that front, German infantry companies settled on reverse slopes. They had cover from direct observation and good fields of fire below them. One weapon strengthened that confidence even more. The 8-centimeter Granatwerfer 34 was already one of the war's respected infantry mortars. Its sight let crews correct fire in small, exact steps. Its maximum range reached 2,400 meters. For the men behind the tube, that figure was protection. Since the campaign in France, it had shaped where men stopped, dug, and expected safety to begin. British Mark II mortars in 1940 and 1941 could not touch that belt. Reverse slope plus distance kept German positions outside British battalion mortar fire. Then the first British bombs arrived. They did not come from the field guns that usually announced an attack. They came from mortars, and they fell into ground the German crews had already measured as safe. These were distances the older British Mark II had not reached in earlier campaigns. The effects showed at once. The reverse slope still screened the position from flat fire, but it no longer screened it from British mortar rounds. German crews could not answer in kind, because their own rounds still ended where the British fall of shot had just begun. By 1943, British bombs landed beyond the distance German crews had treated as safe since France. That reach in Tunisia traced back to a decision made after the First World War. After the armistice in 1918, the War Office reviewed what infantry had learned at the front. The review cut against peacetime habits. One lesson stood out. Close fire support had mattered most in the last year of fighting, because infantry needed rounds beyond rifle range and too near divisional artillery. Wilfred Stokes built the answer in January 1915, and the Army took it into service that same year. By the end of that war, British infantry battalions carried it as their standard light mortar. Its layout was bare: tube, baseplate, bipod. A bomb dropped down the barrel, hit a fixed firing pin, and flew away. A trained crew could keep 9 bombs in the air at once. That had been enough for trench lines. It would not cover the battlefields planners expected in the 1930s, and its reach stopped at about 730 meters. The War Office first backed dedicated artillery batteries for close infantry support, but separate guns and crews carried a bill peacetime budgets would not meet. The price blocked it. So the mortar stayed with the battalion, and in 1932, Britain opened work on the muzzle-loading Mark II with a caliber of about 81 millimeter. That battalion answer carried its own penalty. Mark II entered service in the early 1930s, and its figures showed the compromise almost immediately. Its caliber sat near 81 millimeters. By the 1930s, that size had become normal for battalion mortars in several armies. The full weapon weighed about 52 kilograms, split into 3 loads: a barrel of about 15.4 kilograms, a base plate of about 16.8, and a bipod of about 20.2. Each bomb weighed about 4.5 kilograms. A trained crew could hold roughly 12 rounds a minute. It was portable, it was reliable, but its outer limit stopped at about 1,460 meters. Once British infantry met the German Granatwerfer 34 in France and later in North Africa, the arithmetic turned into a battlefield problem. The German mortar reached 2,400 meters. The British tube could not answer. That left more than 900 meters of unreachable ground, where a German crew could suppress British close support without taking return fire. That gap reached the Ministry of Supply fast. Ordnance engineers reworked the Mark II in 2 steps. New propellant charges first, then a modified barrel. By about 1942, the long-range version had reached the theater. Its reach climbed to about 2,560 meters. That gave British infantry roughly 160 meters over the Granatwerfer 34 before an attack opened. That British edge only mattered because the Germans had built a method around range much earlier. Between 1932 and 1934, Rheinmetall developed the Granatwerfer 34, and the Army adopted it in 1934. The tube mattered, but the RA-35 mattered too. an optical sight that gave trained crews a fast, accurate lay. In practiced hands, the mortar could fire up to 25 rounds a minute. German doctrine gave that speed a first priority. When a crew took position, it looked for enemy mortars before anything else and tried to suppress them first. France had already shown the pattern in 1940, and the early desert repeated it on wider ground. The 81mm mortar was not only an infantry support weapon, it was also a counter-mortar tool inside the battalion fight. Range turned that order into action, because the side that could reach first could pin the other crew before British return fire landed. In the desert, that came down to one decision. German crews placed the mortar where the British Mark II still fell short. That range edge became a position. Across open desert, a German Granatwerfer 34 crew could sit at 2,200 meters. They planted the bipod, laid the sight, and opened fire with confidence because the British Mark II could not answer. Return rounds fell short. France showed that pattern first, and the early desert kept confirming it on the same old safe line. By early 1943, Tunisia cut that shelter away. British changes to the 3-inch mortar erased the old margin and made British battalion mortars a real counter-mortar threat. The safe line was gone. The RA-35 still gave the crew a clean aim point. It could not sight a target that lay beyond the barrel's maximum elevation. Once British crews could answer from the same distances, the argument changed. It became a question of mass. In 1944, a British infantry battalion carried 6 3-inch mortars in No. 3 platoon, and each tube at intense rate could throw about 91 kilograms of explosive weight in a minute. Put all 6 together, and the platoon dropped about 544 kilograms on one target in 60 seconds. That mattered. An 8-gun Royal Artillery battery of 25-pounders, firing at rapid rate, delivered about 454 kilograms in the same minute. For a short concentration, the battalion mortar platoon could match, and even edge, a field battery by delivered weight alone. German crews aimed differently. Their 8-centimeter Granatwerfer depended on observed correction and deliberate fire on a specific point. British training moved another way. Manuals from 1943 and 1944 taught brief, concentrated shoots, not long measured adjustment. The point was to hit hard, then stop. By British standard, 6 tubes put 50 rounds onto an area of about 0.8 hectares in 2 to 3 minutes. Weight of fire was only half the problem. Those 6 tubes could sit behind a ridge or along a tree line and fire without any muzzle flash. German crews heard the dull thump only after the bombs had already left the tubes. By then, the rounds were descending. That delay mattered. Nothing to mark. German crews had almost nothing to correct onto. Their counter-mortar work relied on flash spotting and sound measurement, and cover weakened both methods. Those methods worked far better against field guns firing in the open. The German Granatwerfer 34 weighed 62 kilograms and broke into 3 loads for transport. The British 3-inch mortar also split into 3 loads, about 52 kilograms across barrel, bipod, and base plate. Men carried both. The British platoon treated movement as part of the drill, so the fire mission did not end with the last round. It fired for about 2 minutes, then shifted position, and by the time the enemy could open return fire, the British crew had already left that ground. That same mobility changed the weapon's value in Italy. Mountain ground forced infantry onto predictable approach routes, so a battalion commander usually called the 3-inch mortar platoon first, not because it hit hardest, but because it answered first. The observer stayed in the same valley, the platoon sat inside the battalion, and the chain of confirmation stayed short. About 2 minutes after the call, rounds could already be landing. The distant battery moved slower. In mountain country, it needed survey, registration, and reliable communications through several links before it could answer the same target. That battery might be in another valley, several kilometers away, while messages, calculations, and acknowledgments still moved across the net. On paper, the mortar had replaced dedicated close support batteries. In practice, it often answered faster than the artillery it replaced. In the Italian valleys, the first bombs fell about 2 minutes after the observer called, while the distant battery was still working through its chain. That quick answer from Italy met different ground in Normandy. Each hedgerow cut the fight into small fields, and dense growth blocked sight and masked movement. One position vanished behind the next bank. Then the next one shifted again. Field guns needed a known point. In the bocage, that point kept changing about every 90 meters. Gunners struggled to place artillery without a clean fix, and flat fire could not safely reach past the troops ahead. The 3-inch mortar answered a different need. Its tube lifted from 45 to 80 degrees, so the bomb dropped over the earth bank, past the hedge, and down into slit trenches or weapon pits. German infantry reacted by digging deeper cover and strengthening dugouts against plunging fire. A steep falling bomb entered positions that direct fire almost never touched. Once overhead cover went up, the next weak point sat above it. In Norman bocage, hedges rose on earth banks, and trees over those banks turned to burst into falling splinters. The British 3-inch mortar, about 81.5 millimeters, threw a bomb of roughly 4.5 kilograms, while the German Granatwerfer 34 fired about 3.5. That gap was roughly 30%. On a beaten square about 46 meters across, direct fire still struggled, but a burst in the canopy broke wood downward into dugouts, roofed niches, and reinforced entrances. 6 tubes at 12 rounds a minute for 2 minutes meant 144 bombs. That weight of fire explains the weapon's long life. The Mark II long range stayed the standard British infantry mortar to war's end. It stayed. The ML 3-inch remained a battalion mortar until 1965. No redesign needed. 3 men still carried 3 loads: tube, baseplate, bipod. Then Britain replaced it with the L-16, an 81mm NATO standard mortar with better range and standardized charges. That 1915 idea held. That long service changed the procurement question. Buyers usually rank range and precision first when they judge a weapon. A mortar that stayed in British battalions until 1965 could not be measured by range tables alone. Germany built 75,000 Granatwerfer 34s between 1934 and 1945, and its crews trained for accurate, deliberate fire with range advantage. They learned to correct carefully and spend rounds with control. In the conditions that weapon had been built for, those priorities made sense. What buyers missed was adaptation. Britain did not commission a new mortar when the range deficit appeared. It changed the propellant, adjusted the barrel, and kept fighting with a weapon in the same class, around 81 millimeters. The weapon itself stayed put. Then British commanders stopped measuring 1 tube at a time because 6 tubes under battalion control could do more than a cleaner firing table ever promised. That is where the fear came from. The 3-inch mortar was feared for the weight of a sudden salvo, for how fast the crews could leave, and for one command fact above all: no outside clearance. A battalion could open fire at once without waiting for permission from somewhere above, and that cut delay at the exact moment seconds mattered most. 75,000 Granatwerfer 34s from 1934 to 1945. The British answer was the same caliber class, 6 tubes in the battalion, and fire without delay.